The porcelain teacup shattered, not with a sharp, violent crack, but a soft, almost resigned whisper as it slipped from my numb fingers. The scalding chamomile meant to soothe the tremor that had become a permanent resident in my hands, stained the pristine white carpet a blooming, ugly yellow. Across the room, Liam, my Liam, the one who'd always been just. Liam slumped against the antique dresser, his face a mask of a grief I'd never seen before, a grief that clawed at my own throat, making it impossible to breathe. They said terminal, he whispered, his voice a dry, cracked echo of its usual buoyant self. A rare sarcoma, months, maybe months, not years, not decades. Not the lifetime we'd always joked about, the one where we'd grow old, bickering over crossword clues and sharing stolen sips of lukewarm tea. Liam, the man who'd known me since my awkward, gangly teenage years, the one who'd held my hand through every heartbreak, every career stumble, every late-night existential crisis, was dying. He who was just a friend was now the epicenter of my world, the only constant in a life that suddenly felt like a rapidly disintegrating sandcastle. I remember the day we met, the way his laughter filled the library, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows that always lingered in my periphery. We were studying, or pretending to, and he'd made some ridiculous joke about the Dewey Decimal System, and I'd snorted, spilling my coffee. He wasn't conventionally handsome, not in the way the glossy magazines dictated, but his eyes, a warm hazel brown, held a depth that pulled you in, a silent promise of understanding. He was the one who listened when I rambled about my dreams, the one who knew the exact right moment to offer a comforting silence. We built a world together, a world of shared secrets, inside jokes, and unspoken understandings. But it was a world built on the foundation of friendship, a solid, unbreakable bond that I'd always taken for granted. Now that foundation was cracking, crumbling under the weight of a reality I couldn't comprehend. The doctor's words, sterile and clinical, echoed in my ears: aggressive, inoperable, palliative care. I looked at Liam, his usually vibrant eyes now dull and shadowed, and a terrifying realization began to dawn. It wasn't just grief that was twisting my insides into knots. It was something else, something I'd buried deep, something I'd refused to acknowledge. It wasn't just the fear of losing a friend. It was the gut-wrenching, soul-shattering terror of losing the man I loved. And the twist, the cruel, ironic twist, was that it took the prospect of losing him to make me see that he was never just a friend. He was my anchor, my confidant, my soulmate, and now my dying love. I'd always thought we had time, that our story was a slow burn, a gradual unfolding, but time, it seemed, had other plans, and those plans were to take him from me just as I realized how much I needed him. The hospice room, with its sterile white walls and the faint, antiseptic scent of disinfectant, became our world. We traded the vibrant chaos of our shared apartment for the quiet, hushed atmosphere of monitored beeps and whispered conversations. Every day was a fragile, precious gift, a stolen moment in a reality that was rapidly slipping away. I learned to read the subtle shifts in Liam's breathing, the slight flinch of his hand, the way his eyes would glaze over when the pain became unbearable. We talked, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing: childhood memories, favorite books, the ridiculous arguments we'd had over the best way to load a dishwasher. He told me stories I'd never heard before, tales of his awkward first crush, his disastrous attempt at learning to play the guitar, the time he'd accidentally set his hair on fire trying to bake a cake. And with each story, each shared laugh, each whispered "I remember," the realization solidified. This wasn't just a friendship, it was a love story that was being tragically cut short. I started to notice the way his hand fit perfectly in mine, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the way his voice, even weak and raspy, could still send shivers down my spine. I started to see him not as my friend, but as the man I was desperately, hopelessly in love with. The twist came in the form of a worn leather-bound journal tucked away in the drawer of his bedside table. He'd always been a writer, scribbling in notebooks and scraps of paper, but I'd never seen this particular journal before. Inside, his handwriting, usually neat and precise, was shaky and uneven, a testament to his deteriorating condition. He'd written about us, about our friendship, about the way he'd always felt something more, something deeper. He'd written about the fear of confessing his feelings, the fear of losing me, the fear of ruining the perfect friendship we had. He'd written about his love for me, a love that had bloomed slowly, quietly, until it had consumed him entirely. It was a confession, a declaration, a love letter written in the face of death. And as I read his words, tears streaming down my face, I realized that I wasn't the only one who'd been hiding a secret. He loved me all along, and I, in my blind, foolish denial, had never seen it. The second twist, a cruel and unexpected turn, appeared in the form of his sister, a woman I'd only met a few times. She appeared, a whirlwind of grief and anger, and told me that Liam had known for a long time. He had known about the sarcoma and had hid it from me, from everyone, because he didn't want to become a burden. He wanted to give me the illusion of normal life, of happy friendship for as long as he could. And then he had planned to just slip away. A final, heartbreaking act of selfless love that left me feeling both devastated and filled with a painful yet undeniable surge of love. The weight of his secret, his silent, agonizing love, pressed down on me, a suffocating blanket of regret and what-ifs. How many stolen glances had I missed? How many unspoken words had hung in the air, lost to my own denial? The hospice room, once a sanctuary of quiet intimacy, now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of the time we'd wasted, the love we'd ignored. I started to resent the cheerful nurses, their forced smiles and practiced reassurances. I resented the sun streaming through the window, mocking us with its vibrant, relentless life. I resented the world outside, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding within these four walls. I spent hours by his bedside, holding his hand, tracing the lines on his palm, memorizing every freckle, every scar, every detail of his face. I told him stories, stories of our past, stories of the future we'd never have. I whispered my love, a love that was now raw and desperate, a love that had finally broken free from the chains of denial. He listened, his eyes fluttering, his breath shallow, and sometimes, just sometimes, he'd squeeze my hand, a silent acknowledgement, a fragile affirmation. The twist deepened when I discovered a small velvet box hidden beneath his pillow. Inside, a simple silver ring engraved with our initials and a date that was weeks before his diagnosis, a date that was supposed to be our anniversary. He had planned to propose, to make our unspoken love official, to turn our friendship into something more. He had planned a future that was now irrevocably shattered. The second twist, a jarring, unexpected blow, came in the form of a late-night phone call. It was Liam's doctor, his voice grave and somber. They had found something, a small, previously undetected anomaly in his blood work. A long shot, a desperate gamble, but a possibility nonetheless. A clinical trial, an experimental treatment, a chance, however slim, of extending his life. It was a glimmer of hope, a fragile, flickering flame in the darkness. But hope, I learned, was a dangerous thing, a double-edged sword that could both lift you up and crush you utterly. We clung to it, to that sliver of possibility, like drowning sailors to a life raft. We filled out forms, signed waivers, underwent endless tests. We waited, our breaths held captive by the ticking clock, the relentless march of time. And in those agonizing days of waiting, I realized that my love for him wasn't just a feeling. It was a force, a primal instinct, a desperate, unwavering need. It was the air I breathed, the blood that flowed through my veins, the very essence of my being. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep him alive. I was no longer just a friend, I was a lover, a caretaker, a warrior, fighting for the man who had become my everything. The clinical trial was a roller coaster of emotions, a dizzying cycle of hope and despair. There were days when Liam seemed stronger, his eyes brighter, his voice clearer. And then there were days when the pain would consume him, leaving him weak and trembling, a ghost of his former self. We became experts in medical jargon, in the intricate dance of dosages and side effects. We learned to celebrate the small victories, a meal eaten without nausea, a walk to the garden, a night without the constant, gnawing ache. We also learned to navigate the crushing disappointments, the failed tests, the setbacks, the moments when hope seemed to flicker and die. Through it all, our love deepened, becoming a tangible force, a silent language spoken in shared glances and gentle touches. We talked about our future, the future we were fighting for, the future we desperately wanted to believe in. We planned trips to far-off lands, imagined lazy Sundays spent reading in bed, dreamed of a life filled with laughter and shared adventures. The first twist became the realization that our love was not just a romantic feeling, but was a powerful, tangible force. The medicine was working, not as expected, but more as a catalyst. The love we shared, the sheer will we had to live, was helping Liam heal. Doctors were astonished, unsure how to explain the sudden, unexpected improvement in his condition. They called it a miracle, a medical anomaly, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but I knew the truth. It was our love, our unwavering, unbreakable bond that was keeping him alive. The second twist, however, was a cruel reminder of the fragility of life. The clinical trial, while initially successful, came with a devastating side effect. It was not the body that was failing, but the mind. Liam's memories began to fade like ink dissolving in water. He forgot our shared stories, our inside jokes, the details of our lives together. He looked at me with blank, unfamiliar eyes, a stranger in the body of the man I loved. He remembered fragments, fleeting moments of clarity, but the thread of our shared history was unraveling, leaving behind a tangled mess of disconnected memories. He'd remember my name one moment and then ask me where he knew me from the next. The man I loved was still there, trapped behind a veil of forgetfulness, a prisoner in his own mind. We were winning the battle against his body, but losing the war for his memories. I found myself telling him our story over and over again, hoping that the repetition would somehow etch it back into his mind. I showed him photographs, played him our favorite songs, read him the poems he'd written for me. I tried to recreate our past, to rebuild the bridge that was crumbling beneath our feet. I was losing him not to death but to a different kind of oblivion, a silent, heartbreaking erasure. The silence in the room was thick, heavy, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on my chest. Liam sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a landscape he no longer recognized. His eyes, once filled with warmth and laughter, were now vacant, empty vessels reflecting a world I couldn't reach. I held his hand, his skin cool and smooth beneath my touch, and whispered our story, the story of our friendship, our love, our shared life. He turned to me, his brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it was fleeting, a brief spark in the vast darkness of his memory. He smiled, a gentle, almost childlike smile, and said, "You seem familiar." The first twist, the final, devastating twist, was the realization that our love story, the one we'd fought so hard for, had become a bittersweet tragedy. We had defied death, but we couldn't defy the cruel hand of fate. We had won the battle against his body, but lost the war for his mind. He was alive, but he was no longer the man I loved, the man who knew me, the man who shared my history. He was a stranger, a ghost of his former self, a beautiful, empty shell. The second twist, the final, heartbreaking revelation, came in the form of a small, worn photograph tucked into the pages of his journal. It was a picture of us taken years ago at the very beginning of our friendship. He was smiling, his eyes bright and full of life, and I was laughing, my head thrown back in unrestrained joy. On the back of the photograph, he had written in his familiar, elegant handwriting, "He was just a friend, but he became my one true love." The words, once a testament to our blossoming romance, now felt like a cruel irony, a painful reminder of what we had lost. He was just a friend, and then he became my one true love, and now he was a stranger, a ghost, a memory. And yet, even in his altered state, there was a connection, a faint echo of the love we had shared. He would hold my hand or smile at me or sometimes even whisper my name. It was as if, deep within the labyrinth of his lost memories, a small ember of our love still flickered, a faint, fragile flame that refused to be extinguished. And in those moments I clung to that ember, that fragile connection, and I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic and reason, that even in his forgetfulness he was still my one true love. The title, "He Was Just a Friend, But He Became My One True Love," wasn't just a statement of our past. It was a testament to our enduring connection, a love that transcended memory, a love that defied oblivion.